After my father became paralyzed, I quit my job to return home and cared for him day and night for 5 years. But as soon as he passed away, his mistress and her daughter brought people to kick me out of the house. Only then did I learn that my father had already made a will, leaving all his inheritance to the mistress and her daughter. Not a single penny was left for me. Penniless and riddled with illness, I wandered dazedly into the street and was fatally struck by a truck. When I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the day my father suffered a sudden cerebral hemorrhage. The moment I regained consciousness, despite the lingering excruciating pain in my body, I immediately grabbed my phone and dialed my father's number. According to my memories from my past life, by this time he should already be in the emergency room and definitely wouldn't be able to answer the call. Yet I still dialed the number, quietly turning on the recording function. The call connected quickly, and as expected, I heard the voice of Patricia, my mother's distant cousin. She was also the family housekeeper, having worked for our household since the day I was born. "Lynn, your father went out to take care of some business but forgot his phone at home." I sneered inwardly. Patricia was using the exact same excuse as in my previous life. In my past life, on the very day my father suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and was rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment, I happened to call him, a rare occurrence, only for Patricia to answer and conceal the truth, telling me instead that he'd gone out without his phone. At the time, I didn't give it much thought. After exchanging a few perfunctory pleasantries, I simply hung up. But when my father finally regained consciousness that night after the doctor's desperate efforts, Patricia opened the call log and said to him with a pained and regretful expression, "How could Lynn be so cold-blooded and heartless? When you were in critical condition today, she happened to call. I told her your situation was urgent, but she said you brought this on yourself by drinking so much, that you deserved the brain hemorrhage. She even said if you had a brain hemorrhage, you'd surely end up paralyzed, bedridden and needing care, so you might as well just die." My father was so enraged he nearly passed out again on the spot. My mother passed away early, and since I had attended boarding schools throughout my education and later stayed abroad for work, the father-daughter bond between us had always been distant. With this incident, it plummeted to freezing point. For the next 3 months, my father neither answered my calls nor replied to my messages. Patricia, however, would occasionally send me comforting messages in secret, assuring me that my dad was fine, perhaps just feeling down because of the colder weather lately, and that he'd return to normal given time. At the time, I had just been promoted, and every day from the moment I opened my eyes, I was swamped with endless tasks demanding my attention, leaving me little energy to dwell on it. 3 months later, I received a call from the neighbor across from my father's apartment. The woman told me the trash bags outside his door had been sitting there for nearly a week and had begun to rot, filling the hallway with a foul stench. She mentioned knocking repeatedly with no response, and that Patricia and her daughter, who used to come and go frequently, hadn't been seen lately. My heart lurched with panic, and I immediately called the police. When officers forced the door open, a wave of putrid air rushed out. The kitchen writhed with maggots, and there lay my father, filthy, speechless, and too weak to move. Without a phone, he'd been reduced to skin and bones. The moment I saw this, I booked the next available flight at any cost. I traveled day and night without rest until I reached home. From that day onward, I devoted myself wholeheartedly to taking care of my father, persevering for 5 years until his passing. In this life, as soon as Patricia finished speaking, I replied, "It's been so long since I last saw my father. I've missed him terribly, and his birthday is coming up soon. I want to come back to celebrate with him and spend some quality time together. I've already bought my plane ticket and will arrive tomorrow. Don't forget to let him know when he gets home." Patricia immediately panicked and urgently tried to dissuade me. "Lynn, you're so busy with work, taking leave wouldn't be good. Besides, making the round trip isn't just expensive with the airfare, it would also take up so much of your time. Don't worry, I'm taking good care of your father. He's perfectly healthy." She was still lying through her teeth, but I didn't expose her. Instead, I just chuckled lightly and said, "No matter how important work is, how could it compare to my dad? Besides, no matter how well you take care of him, you're still an outsider after all. How could you ever be as considerate as his own daughter? Patricia was left speechless by my words and didn't know how to respond. She stayed silent for a long while. I couldn't be bothered to continue the conversation either and simply hung up the phone. Then I picked up the suitcase beside me and turned to leave for the airport. But still feeling uneasy, I grabbed my phone and contacted my old classmate Alexander, who happened to work at the very hospital where my father was being treated. I asked him to help look after my dad. Without the slightest hesitation, Alexander immediately agreed. The next evening, I finally arrived, weary from the journey, at my father's hospital bed. By then, he had regained consciousness, though his lower body was already paralyzed. Still, he could move his hands and speak. Before entering the ward, I had already gathered my tears outside the door. So the moment I pushed it open, I rushed to his side with a tear-streaked face, sobbing brokenly. "Dad. I'm sorry. I couldn't come back sooner to take care of you. But don't worry, from now on I'll always stay by your side and look after you." As I spoke, I cried my heart out. The doctors and nurses in the ward were moved to tears, sighing, "Having a daughter is truly wonderful. So caring and thoughtful. Sir, you're truly blessed. Even though you're ill, with such a filial and considerate daughter, what is there to fear?" Alexander also chimed in, "Uncle David, Lynn called me yesterday right after you were admitted to the hospital, asking me to come see you. She really cares about you deeply." "Is that so? If Patricia hadn't begged you to come back and see me one last time, you probably wouldn't have bothered to return, would you?" My father asked me with a cold expression and an icy tone. Patricia shot me a triumphant glance before pretending to be gentle as she consoled my father. "It's rare for Lynn to call you. When she called yesterday, I couldn't hold back and told her you were seriously ill, urging her to come back as soon as possible, or she might miss seeing you for the last time. That's why she bought a ticket and came back." After speaking, she turned to me and apologized. "I'm sorry, Lynn. Yesterday, I was so worried about your father that I panicked and overreacted, urging you to come back immediately. It's all my fault for making you take leave and rush back here, wasting your time and money for nothing. Look, your father is no longer in critical condition now. I'll stay by his side throughout the treatment and recovery. There's nothing you can do to help here anyway, so you'd better hurry back." After she finished speaking, the expressions of everyone present changed instantly, their gazes shifting from admiration to contempt and condemnation. My father was so furious he started cursing. "How could I have raised such an ungrateful daughter? You only rushed back when you thought I was about to die, just to get your hands on my inheritance, didn't you? Don't even dream about it. You won't get a single penny of my estate." I chuckled inwardly. For once in this lifetime, he was right. I had indeed rushed back solely for the inheritance. As for him, whether he lived or died, I couldn't care less. But I kept those thoughts to myself, letting my tears fall even harder. Then, with trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and played the recorded call. Instantly, the clear recording reached the ears of everyone present. After hearing it, all were shocked. "Dad, I'm your own flesh and blood. How could you just believe the one-sided words of an outsider? It was Patricia who lied, saying you were fine, and kept stopping me from coming back to see you. Even when you were in the emergency room, she still acted this way. I can't fathom what her intentions were." I pressed further while the iron was hot. Patricia, never expecting I'd recorded the conversation, could only stammer in defense, "I was just worried about you. You're not a doctor, what could you have done to help your dad even if you rushed back?" I almost couldn't help laughing. She actually had a point, I really couldn't help my father recover. But I never intended to help him recover in the first place. I just wanted to prevent him from making the same will as in my previous life. In my past life, the moment my father regained consciousness, Patricia exaggeratedly claimed that I had cursed him, wishing for his early death so I could inherit his fortune sooner. Furious and dizzy with rage, my father immediately summoned a lawyer to draft a will, stating that after his death, all his assets would be inherited by Patricia and her daughter Clara. Among those assets, the most valuable was a large abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city. The factory building was something my mother worked hard to earn back in the day. Before she passed away, the family business was thriving, but after she was gone, it quickly declined. Those factory buildings were left abandoned, unable to be sold, and even renting them out at a low price proved impossible. Life at home gradually became financially strained, yet my father still managed to maintain his previous wealthy and comfortable lifestyle by selling off the properties under my mother's name. By the end, all he had left under his name was one house and those factory buildings. At that point, I was the one covering his daily expenses and the cost of Patricia's caregiver. Later, when he became paralyzed, I quit my high-paying job to take care of him. I used my savings to take him around the world seeking renowned doctors, hoping to restore his legs so he could walk and move freely again. This lasted for 5 years, and my savings were quickly exhausted. By the time he died, I was exhausted, plagued by illness, and penniless. Shortly after his death, the city planned to build a new international airport on the outskirts, and the location chosen was that abandoned factory site. I roughly estimated that the demolition compensation would be at least hundreds of millions. But that very night, Patricia and her daughter barged into my home with a group of burly men, brandishing a notarized will, and kicked me out of the house. At the same time, the demolition money landed in their pockets. With nowhere to go and no money to hire a lawyer to fight for my rightful share, I wandered the streets in a daze, until a speeding truck running a red light hit me, killing me instantly. In this lifetime, I absolutely won't let the tragedy happen again. What rightfully belongs to me, I will take it all back. With this thought, I turned to the attending physician beside me and asked, "Doctor, my father's legs still have some hope of recovery, don't they?" The doctor nodded. "There is hope, but it's quite slim. However, if you have the time and financial means, the possibility of recovery could increase. You could first try other renowned hospitals domestically, or consult doctors in some foreign countries if conditions permit. Anything would be better than watching him become completely paralyzed." After the doctor finished speaking, my father's eyes immediately lit up. I stepped forward and took his hand, saying softly, "Dad, don't worry. I'm your own daughter. I'm not afraid of hardship or exhaustion, nor will I spare any expense. I'll definitely take you to find the best doctors in the world to cure your legs. I want you to stand up again, not spend your whole life lying helpless in bed or having to depend on others for everything." Tears welled up in my father's eyes as he lovingly patted my arm and replied, "Lynn truly is the best daughter in the world." Patricia's eyes grew flustered at the sight of our father-daughter harmony. She forced a dry laugh and said to my father, "David, the doctors have already said there's little hope. You're not young anymore, and running around will only make your condition worse. Just lie down and rest peacefully. Clara and I will take good care of you without the slightest complaint." My father's gaze turned icy as he gritted his teeth and snapped, "I want to stand up and walk on my own. You just wish I could only lie down so you can manipulate me freely, don't you?" In my previous life, Patricia had also promised to take good care of my father with her daughter. Yet after just 3 months of care, they couldn't take it anymore and simply ran back to their hometown, leaving my father to fend for himself. But when I returned from abroad, Patricia, seeing that my dad wouldn't die anytime soon, secretly told him, "David, a few days ago we had an urgent matter back home and had to leave. Lynn promised she would find a nanny and come back herself. But who knew she would ignore you and almost get you killed?" She leaned over my father's bedside, sobbing and added, "Now that her own daughter is back to take care of you, we're outsiders and shouldn't overstay our welcome. But we'll visit often, and don't hesitate to ask if you need anything." It's not that she felt too embarrassed to stay, she simply didn't want to endure hardship, pushing all the burdens onto me alone. But in my past life, I didn't even have the mind to dwell on it, all my focus was fixed on my father. My mother was already gone, and if my father were to pass away too, then I would have no family left in this world. But after being reborn, I realized that while I considered my father my closest relative, he didn't feel the same way about me. So until his death, he never amended that will, never considered leaving me a single penny. In this life, I won't be so foolish again. After my father was discharged from the hospital and returned home, I didn't hire a nurse but took care of him myself. Patricia also stayed and tended to him even more meticulously than I did. After all, I had no experience serving others, while Patricia had been by my father's side for so many years. She was intimately familiar with all his habits and naturally knew how to make him more comfortable. So in this lifetime, despite my repeated secret efforts to have a lawyer persuade my father to draft a will as soon as possible, he still refused to comply. I grew increasingly anxious. The holidays were about to end, and if I didn't return to work soon, I'd have no choice but to resign. But this time I would never quit my job for my father again. I had to make him finalize his will as quickly as possible. That day, Patricia's daughter Clara finally came back from school to visit my father. She was still in college, but dressed exquisitely in designer clothes from head to toe, completely belying her status as just a housekeeper's daughter. Only after being reborn did I learn that Patricia had been involved with my father while my mother was still alive, and most of the family's money had ended up in their pockets. That's why Clara had always lived such a luxurious and extravagant life. Seeing her arrival, I made an excuse to leave the house, saying I had errands to run. As she entered my father's bedroom and saw Patricia bustling around attending to him, while my father lay snoring loudly like a dead pig, she immediately curled her lip in disdain. She said to her mother, "Mom, why are you still taking care of this old relic? He's already paralyzed. Isn't it exhausting to look after a paralyzed old man? His daughter never mentioned giving you a raise. With that energy, you could be working 2 jobs outside and earning double." Patricia immediately glanced nervously at my father, and seeing him sound asleep, she finally relaxed. She lowered her voice and said to Clara, "Keep it down. If he hears us, it's over. You think I want to take care of him? Do I have nothing better to do? It's all about buttering him up so he'll write his will and leave his property to us. Once I've turned that father and daughter against each other and the will is finalized, I won't give a damn about that old fool anymore." Clara immediately laughed, "Mom's still the best. Then we can just let that old bastard rot." That night, when I returned home, I saw my father glaring at me the moment I stepped through the door. "Lynn, are you trying to drive Patricia away? Let me tell you, I don't want any nurses in this house. None of them can care for me like Patricia does. Are you trying to get those nurses to abuse me and make me die sooner?" My father questioned me sharply. I froze for a moment. It seemed Patricia had discovered my attempt to secretly replace her with another caregiver. Before I could explain, Patricia wiped her tears and sobbed beside me. "Lynn has never taken care of anyone before, of course she wouldn't understand how these things work. Those hired caregivers just want the money, they loaf on the job, how could they possibly care? If you think I'm doing something wrong, just say it directly. I'll work hard to improve. As long as your father can be comfortable, recover soon, and get better, I'd willingly endure any hardship without complaint." I watched quietly as she finished her performance before smiling and replying, "Patricia, you're overthinking it. I'm hiring a caregiver not to replace you, but to assist you. You know I have no experience and won't learn quickly enough to do much in the short term. When the caregiver arrives, you'll just need to direct her work and won't have to exhaust yourself like now. Isn't this because I care about you and don't want you to overexert yourself?" After hearing me out, Patricia could only awkwardly fall silent before excusing herself to have dinner. My father's expression softened considerably too. I glanced at Patricia's retreating figure, then pulled out my phone, opened the video, and handed it to my father. Clara had clearly recorded every word of Patricia and her daughter's conversation in the room during the day. They had no idea I'd secretly installed surveillance cameras at home. This time, my father couldn't take it anymore. He immediately decided to kick Patricia out of the house, unmoved by her desperate sobs and pleas. He even shouted, "You viperess! After all these years of my kindness, this is how you repay me, wishing for my death? If either of you ever dares show your faces before me again, I'll have someone beat you to death on the spot." I watched coldly from the side. Patricia cried herself out and eventually had no choice but to get up, pack her things, and leave my home. Not long after she left, my father immediately called a lawyer and, right in front of me, drew up his will. In this lifetime, all the inheritance would finally be mine to inherit. Lynn, only now does Dad realize that you're the only one who truly cares for me and loves me. Suppressing my disgust, I smiled and said, it's the least I could do. I'll start contacting top doctors in other cities tomorrow. Once everything's arranged, I'll take you there for treatment. Don't worry, I'll do everything in my power to heal your leg, and then we'll travel the world together. My father's face lit up with a blissful smile. But early the next morning, Patricia returned, holding a paternity test report which she handed to my father. With teary eyes she said mournfully, David, Clara is actually your daughter too. I never told you all these years because I didn't want to burden you. You're angry with me now and don't want to see me, it's all my fault, I understand that. But Clara, she's just a child. She didn't know you were her real father, that's why she said those things. You can abandon me if you want, but Clara is your own flesh and blood. The child is innocent. Patricia spoke while tears streamed down her face. Before my father could respond, Clara came running in from outside, crying, and knelt before him. Dad. So you're my real father after all. Don't worry, Dad, now that I know the truth, I promise I'll take good care of you from now on. My father looked at the two crying figures, and his expression visibly softened, especially when his gaze fell upon Clara. To be honest, the bond between him and Clara ran far deeper than what we shared. After all, thanks to Patricia's deliberate scheming, Clara had spent far more years by his side than I ever had. What's more, Clara had always played the role of the sweet, obedient daughter around him, a facade that had thoroughly won his affection. Even before learning she was his biological daughter, he had doted on her endlessly. Now that the truth was out, whatever anger he'd felt moments earlier vanished completely. Patricia and her daughter naturally stayed on. They took even greater care of my father than before, serving him as comfortably as an emperor. I didn't interfere, it was less work for me. Moreover, using the excuse of needing to inspect hospitals and doctors abroad, I simply returned to my job overseas and resumed working, leaving the mother and daughter to bustle around the house. Thanks to Patricia's relentless efforts, my father soon called in the lawyer again and drafted a new will, dividing his estate into 3 parts, of which I was only to receive 1. When the lawyer called to inform me of this news, I merely gave a faint smile and didn't react in the slightest. In less than a month, I received a call from Patricia saying my father had died and that I needed to return home immediately to sign the inheritance papers. When I rushed back to the country, I found out that Patricia and her daughter had completely ignored the doctor's advice, feeding my father heavily sugared, oily, and salty meals every day. This caused his diabetes to rapidly worsen, ultimately leading to festering limbs, multiple organ failure, and death. But by then, my father had already been quickly cremated according to his will, and there was nothing the police could do about it. Patricia and her daughter hired a bunch of local thugs to intimidate me into signing the papers quickly. They wanted to get their hands on my father's inheritance as soon as possible. Because while my father was still alive after making his will, that mother and daughter had already started taking out loans everywhere, living a life of extravagance ahead of time. Now that my father is dead, those creditors are pressuring them daily to repay the debts. I immediately hired a lawyer and sued Patricia and her daughter in court, accusing them of forging the will. In court, Patricia produced the will personally made by my father and said smugly, "This one is genuine, it has your father's signature and fingerprint, and it's notarized. It couldn't be more real." Then she added maliciously, "I know your family's fortune was actually earned by your mother. But there's nothing you can do, who told her to die so early? Even though you're her only biological daughter, you can only inherit a third, which is less than what we, mother and daughter, get." I rushed forward and slapped her hard across the face. "You want 2/3? Dream on. You won't get a single penny." Patricia, who always played the innocent victim, was stunned by the sudden blow and stood frozen, forgetting to fight back. After what seemed like forever, she finally covered her face and wailed, "Lynn, this was your father's own will. You only get 1/3. If you think it's unfair, go dig your father up and make him rewrite a new will for you. What a pity, he's already turned to ashes, dead beyond dead. Even if you beat me to death, nothing can change that." As she spoke, she began looking smug again. At that moment, I turned around and pulled out several yellowed sheets of paper from my bag, handing them to the judge. I'd found this agreement by chance in a hidden compartment of my mother's old dressing table after my father returned from the hospital. It was a contract my mother had signed with my father before her death, properly notarized and carrying irrefutable legal weight. According to the agreement's terms, if my father were ever unfaithful, all their property, whether marital assets or individual premarital possessions, would automatically transfer to my name alone, with no inheritance rights granted to anyone else. So, the will in Patricia's hands was completely invalid. Patricia and her daughter were dumbfounded. They wailed and caused a scene in court, even pretending to be dead on the floor. In the end, they were dragged out by the police. I quickly completed the inheritance procedures. Just as the paperwork was finalized, news came about the new airport construction. After signing the demolition compensation agreement, I truly became a wealthy woman and immediately bought a ticket to board an international flight. Patricia and her daughter were plunged into utter destitution, with no food or shelter. Worse still, they faced constant threats and beatings from loan sharks. Eventually, seeing the mother and daughter completely incapable of repaying the debt, the creditors resorted to intimidation and empty promises before selling them into the most sordid flesh markets. Before long, both mother and daughter contracted terminal illnesses and perished one after another. As for me, this lifetime, I will live freely and happily.